The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Want the real story behind the sound bites and headlines? Let's find the facts. Remember, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's the truth. You are not paranoid or confused. You just need to know.
Welcome, everybody. It's time for Need to Know on the TKR Network. Kip Keefer with you for another program here. And, if you are sitting there wondering, what is he going to say today? What is he going to talk about? Well, you know what we have to talk about, the results of the election last Tuesday. But maybe your bewilderment about what I'm going to articulate is kind of in league with mine, because I have so many thoughts and so many reactions to what we saw on Tuesday, November 5th. The resounding voices of Americans were heard. There's a lot to unpack here, and I really don't have a plan. I just want to sit here for the next 30 minutes or so and just have a general discussion of things that I've seen, things that I have absorbed, and just talk about, last week's edition of Need to Know, where I took what I hoped was a conciliatory tone and just said, look, vote your conscience, vote what you think, vote what you believe. It's never been the goal of this program to try and push you in a direction you don't want to go. I just try to enlighten you with the information that I gather, because I'll admit it, that's pretty much what I do with 100% of my time. I just was reading an article this morning for a long time, very elaborate article about the motivations of former President Barack Obama, who continued from behind the scenes to kind of run the show these last 4 years. This was de facto the third Obama term. And it's interesting. The article was about what his obsession with Iran is and why it's been the central part of all of his foreign policy efforts over the years. It just gives you an example. If you read these really academic articles and they break down all sides of a story in a journalistic fashion, which is hard to find these days, you've got to get on the internet and look for the articles written in credible publications. And when I say that, I'm not talking about right wing. I'm not talking about, Republican or conservative. I don't seek out those news sources. I look for academians who have some perspective and have some expertise. A lot of times papers that come from different college professors that are not this ultra left kind of wackos that have a completely different worldview than what makes any sense. But you look for those kind of things that gives you a balanced and I do that because I want to understand where the motivations come from a lot of these policymakers that doesn't make any sense to me. I want to understand why they believe what they practice. And so that's kind of the way, I got my feelings hurt recently in a family discussion about the election coming up, where a couple of my relatives had some misinformation accusing Donald Trump of something he actually did not do, which is not always the case. But in this particular case, I knew what they were saying was wrong. And they were saying basically that they were going to make the judgment on who to vote for off of this erroneous information. And when I challenged them that produce evidence that this is true, because I follow this morning, noon, night. I'm a political junkie. I'm an American history fanatic. Of course, I love sports, as all my football programming and all the other things. So my plate is really full because I'm constantly seeking information in every area of things that interest me. And another very close relative to me, when I said, I watch this every day, I read everything, I follow it all, and I said, and I have not heard him making that statement. And this other relative really close to me said, well, that's not a surprise, basically indicating. And then another one said something about my broadcast partner, Terry Quillian, who worked in the Trump administration. And so when I said, he said, it's not a surprise. And I said, well, I mean, are you accusing me of being like a robotic kind of person that only listens to Fox News and gets my marching orders from there? Because that's sure what that crack sounded like. And then like I say, another relative said, well, Terry is probably a big influence on you too. Terry and I influence each other, but we talk in long dissertations about every aspect of issues. It is not some kind of right-wing orgy of information that I am consumed with that shapes my opinions on things. I, again, will be happy to tell you that I am expert in American history. I know everything about how this country has reached the point where we are now and has gotten to the stage of and I can go back and look at things that happened in the past with our country and tell you that every time we live in an era where we think this is the grand test of everything, this country has faced so many situations where it comes down to kind of a philosophical question, because there's been pushback, as the founding fathers suspected there would be, on this system of the government being run by the people themselves, of the people, by the people, for the people. It is still scoffed at around the world in a lot of corners that cannot work, that it's got to be some kind of strong central massive government like China's that controls not only everything political, but all the industry in the country, the health care, all of the issues of the citizens. The government really makes the call on everything and has their fingers in everything. There's no individual liberty. There's no privacy. There's no, people really making their own decisions without heavy government influence. And that's the conception that a lot of people in this country have adopted and thinks that that needs to take place. It's mostly Ivy League educated elites who gravitate to government, or jobs in the legacy media. That's a new term that's been on the boiler for a few months here. The legacy media, of course, being the New York Times, the Washington Post, ABC, NBC, CBS, all of these now de facto state-run media outlets that in an independent study done by several different university journalism schools, 98% of stories about Donald Trump during this election cycle were stamped negative. 98%. Whereas the Biden, then Harris candidacy had a negativity rating in the 30% range. So that's a gigantic disparity. I'm talking about all of this because if you expected me to come on today and be giddy with excitement because of the result, if you listened to this show last Monday, I told you what the result was going to be. I told you this wasn't razor thin. I told you this was not a dead heat, the closest election ever in history, potentially. I told you that one side was going to blow the other out, and I did not say Trump was going to win definitively. I did say it's not going to be close, and the American people are going to make the right decision. So you know what I meant when I said that, and of course that played out, because let me just tell you, folks, this is a strong mandate. And if you know anything about history, every time we're kind of backed into this corner where somebody's trying to transform this country, and again, I'm not just pulling that term from the sky. Barack Obama in 2008, the night he won the election to become president of the United States, he said, "This is the beginning of the transformation of America." He wasn't just talking about domestic policy. He was talking about foreign policy, because guys like Barack Obama believe that the problems in the world emanate from the meddling and the direct involvement of the United States. The United States has been, quote, meddling, unquote, and has been involved in foreign affairs by absolute necessity. In World War I, France was getting its ass kicked. Germany was about to take over the entire European continent. They desperately needed help. The United States came to the rescue with an inexperienced military that they whipped into shape in no time whatsoever, and pushed back and defeated the German threat and preserved democracy and tranquility in Europe for about 20 years, until Germany rose again. And once again, despite tremendous opposition to getting involved in another European war at the unbelievable high expense of the lives of our sons and daughters, Roosevelt held out to the very last moment, denying we were ever going to send anybody. But when it became apparent after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attack, and Adolf Hitler doing probably one of the stupidest things in world history, he was already in control of the European theater. He had already then initiated an invasion of Russia, which was absolutely absurd, because fighting a war of that magnitude on two fronts was a great example of just the maniacal insanity of this awful person who was just convinced that he was some kind of heavenly deity and was inspired by the spirits of ancient Egypt and ancient societies. But then when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and Roosevelt famously, it's coming up, the anniversary here in just a couple of weeks, December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy, because this was an unprovoked attack on the Hawaiian naval base. And let's not diminish the fact that not only were so many of our naval forces, the actual equipment destroyed, but we lost 2,000 lives in that attack. That wasn't like, these days you go bomb some kind of ammunition depot in Syria and they said, and reportedly 3 people were killed. We lost 2,000 of our finest young men and women in these attacks, not to mention, and it wasn't limited to just them. It was a lot of people who lived on Pearl Harbor, near Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. A lot of regular citizens were caught in the fire too. So it was an abominable act. And because Roosevelt declared war on Japan, Germany, of course, aligned with the Japanese Empire. Hitler immediately, in turn, declared war on the United States. Big mistake, because that hastened the justification. Roosevelt knew that America had to get into that fight, and that's what pushed the button for America to mobilize in a way that the world still is just absolutely blown away by. The greatest titans of industry in this country partnering with the government in a time of our darkest hour, especially when they got reports that Germany was developing an atomic bomb. The American genius and ingenuity beat them to that punch, and then delivered, without a nuclear weapon in Europe, but an audacious naval invasion, air invasion, D-Day, of course, on June 6, 1944. That turned the tide of the war. And, of course, the war was ended in Japan with the use of the new nuclear weapons. But it just showed the exceptionalism, the greatness of America, that this country rolled up their sleeves with absolutely, after World War I, there was so much anti-war sentiment. Our military was in shambles. We didn't really have any equipment, any tanks, didn't have a trained army. And what the Americans did in just a couple of years to go and for the second time in 20 years, liberate an entire continent from the most the greatest face of evil we've ever seen speaks to what this country is all about and why we might be fragmented and factionalized. America still stands strong, as we saw last Tuesday night. I was at work on Friday, walking through the hallway, and I saw somebody approaching who I know always wants to talk to me about politics and talk about how evil Donald Trump is and how the Republicans are, Nazis, and I'm too polite. I do rebut, of course, but I don't want to stand there in the hall and listen to a bunch of manufactured words that this person has not formed their own opinions. This person basically quotes what is being spewed on MSNBC and CNN and all of the other legacy networks. But he looked up and saw me coming and said to me, well, congratulations, I guess. Your candidate won. And I just I keep level-headed. I don't snap, but I just kind of looked at him. I stopped in my tracks and I said, no, it's not my candidate. It's America that won, because America did what I just described. When the chips are down, we're backed into a corner, and we are on the verge of being taken a direction that this country was never intended to go. A course correction always historically takes place, because once these kind of movements start, and Hitler is the most extreme example in Europe, but even domestically, we've had situations here where this country and the representative republic that it's founded on, the lifeblood that is its backbone, the Constitution, is challenged and looks like it might be on the ropes. But one thing that always happens if you follow history, and I talked about it on this show a year ago, when the other side is starting to enjoy some traction and are making progress, they always make the fatal step of taking it too far. It's almost like they have no choice, because if they start to progress, they have to really push the gas down and hit the accelerator of trying to really complete the totality of their agenda. And it's always a fatal mistake, because when that happens, people realize what's going on. And the course correction historically in this country has always occurred. And throughout the history of the world, it has occurred in every one of these circumstances where the people trying to push themselves into the arena and basically take control of everything that's traditional and fundamentally set for wherever they might be in whatever situation. The agitator that wants to change everything always bites off more than they can chew. In the words of the Frank Sinatra song, there are times, I'm sure you knew, when I bit off more than I could chew. That's what almost every agitator in the history of the world does. And that's what this movement, this progressive movement, this woke movement, when they start arguing that libraries taking books out that are geared toward first and second graders called My Two Daddies, or depicting sexual situations and justifying the normality of things that people can make those assessments. I'm not going to judge anybody for their opinions or who they love or what they want to do when they're an adult, but a second grader doesn't need to be reading books like that in a library. And when you do the obvious thing and remove them, they're screaming that we're censorship, that the people that are exercising the ultimate common sense are motivated by censorship and banning and burning books like they did in Nazi Germany. The projection, the turnaround is always ridiculous. And eventually, even people that are kind of on the fence or one issue voters that kind of lean that way start to realize that this is ridiculous. This is not who I am. I don't want to see this kind of absurdity. I don't want to see my little girls have to play on a field or a court against a biological male. It's the things that they push for, the transgender surgeries when you're a child, if you identify as a different sex in elementary school. Legislation in California is the parents don't even need to be informed if the child at 7 or 8 years old says, I want to be mutilated here and have this transformation surgery. This is a lot of sidebars of things that I think need to be said, because when they push and they go for too much, and when you start putting our children in the game, that's a bridge too far, because a lot of the things they were getting away with this DEI nonsense and all of this revision of American history, saying the country actually started in 1620 with the first importation of slaves. All of that, a lot of Americans might shrug off, but you start putting the children of America into that discussion and into that arena, and start suggesting that government and these people on the far left are better qualified to make decisions on behalf of your kid. That's a hill that people in America will die on. The hill that they're going to defend with every breath in their body, that don't mess with my children. I'm their parent and I make the decisions for them and what's best for them. And when government and society starts to try to take that role, they've gone way out of line and are going to get pulled back. And that's exactly what we saw last Tuesday night, when a coalition think of the remarkable situation. Trump got a huge portion of the Jewish vote and the Arab American vote. It just shows you that people at their core, no matter what their differences are basically, in terms of family and traditional values, no matter how they've arrived there, that is where they are. And you get those kind of coalitions. Black males, especially young black males, voted in droves for Donald Trump because they've grown up sophisticated and understanding that this generational obsession with voting for Democrats, when the only time they care about this constituency is in election years, they ignore them the rest of the time. There's never any progress in education or opportunity for Black Americans. It's always the same old stuff. And now in a lot of inner cities, this infusion of millions of illegals that are taking up more of the government services and being offered things that the American communities that have been in need have never had access to. It's just too much. They pushed too far, too fast. It had to end, and it did on Tuesday. This is the end of the progressive movement in terms of it having a foothold in our society. It's the end of any credibility for legacy media. It was a great night for America. It has nothing to do with the individuals that were running. It's all about philosophy. I got to get to two other quick things. Number one, the excuses the night of the election. Juan Williams came on late night, who's a liberal commentator that Fox insists on employing to give us different voices, but they really just kind of stand out like a sore thumb. Juan Williams starts off his soliloquy by saying, I'm in shock tonight. I just can't believe that Americans, just 4 years after this individual led an insurrection to overthrow our government, has been chosen to be president with such a resounding margin. Well, Juan, let me refresh your memory. An insurrection is an organized, planned, armed violent takeover of a government or institution. If this was an insurrection, it was probably the most piss poor one of all time, because this was a bunch of people in the Capitol to express their outrage on an obviously altered election, which we're seeing some of the same shenanigans still. We're a week after the election, and in congressional races, that congressional races, now remember, that's not statewide. That's just one area of your state. We're only talking about maybe in a lot of these places, just, no more than 75, 80,000 votes. You can count those in a couple of hours, but they drag their feet. They slow walk it. If the results aren't shaping up like they want them in these pockets of America, in the same old states, it's Arizona, it's Nevada, it's California, Nevada and Arizona, Trump carried handily, but we've still got congressional races, 20 of them that are not determined. That makes no sense at all. These aren't statewide races with millions of voters. These are regions of states. And why can't they count the vote and tell us who won? It's absolutely absurd. So anyway, Juan Williams saying this about an insurrection. Trump was not there. Trump spoke to the crowd earlier in the day and said, go to the Capitol, let your voices be heard. That directive is not go inside and cause a bunch of damage and raise hell. And if you're having an insurrection, you come armed with something more than your cell phone. These people, they're talking about violence. 120 officers were hurt. Well, we have no documentation of that. The footage I've seen that they don't want you to see is just people running around, taking selfies, jumping up and down. I didn't see a single congressional person, a senator, a congressman. None of them were abused or beaten up or threatened. They got them out of there, of course. But the bottom line is this was just an angry group of people that got coerced into coming into the Capitol because the powers that be in this movement knew they could get great capital out of this for the next bunch of years. It was just another way to make sure that Donald Trump would never rise again, because Donald Trump is the antichrist to everything they're trying to accomplish. Donald Trump has stood in a withering fire of literal fire, including 2 assassination attempts, but countless indictments, ridiculous charges in New York, where they combined some state laws that were minor offenses that were not felonies with federal election law. It's never been done in the history of the country. Federal law and some ridiculous, minor indiscretions in state law in terms of disclosure and mistakes on reports were combined into 34 felony charges, which the jury took about 20 minutes to say, yeah, he's guilty of everything, because in New York, you're not going to get a fair trial. And any judge that allowed that to continue, it was just a kangaroo third world country court. And anybody saying he's a convicted felon is just full of shit. I'm sorry. That's what they are, because these were Trump. Good pun here. Trumped up charges. This was not a fair situation. This guy also endured a raid of his home. He had documents which he was allowed to have as a former president. Hillary Clinton did not have that status. She had the same kind of information on her private server, which was a heinous crime. And Joe Biden, never having been president, had boxes and boxes of classified documents, but was found too old and incapable of understanding and defending himself against those charges. But Trump could be indicted with like 60 charges as a former president. He has every right to retain presidential documents. Anyway, the whole thing was so glaringly transparent. It was sad. And then the next day I heard the ultimate one. I don't know who she was. One of the anchors on one of the leftist shows that was saying, it was an African-American young lady saying, well, I think we learned something about our country last night. We can't have a mixed race candidate married to a Jewish man they have no chance to get American support. So now it's dismissed down to a racist, misogynist, phobia against a daughter of a Caribbean mother and an Indian father, married to a Jewish guy. That it seems to me like if they had any substance, if she had any substance, that would be a lot of constituencies that might jump on board. But instead, we're a racist nation. We're a misogynist nation. That's why she didn't win. Of course, it had nothing to do with her policies or her complete lack of substance. It had nothing to do with they spent $1 billion trying to get her elected and now are $20 million in debt because they overspent. And a lot of the money was spent on hiring Beyonce and different artists and celebrities. And these people were so committed to the campaign, they were taking millions of dollars just to show up and shill for Kamala. She lost because she was the worst candidate maybe in the history of this country, brought nothing to the table, has been on the job in the White House for over 3,000 days, and she's telling you about things she's going to do to help you on day one of her administration, including cutting your taxes. No Democrat has cut taxes in the modern era. It's not done. It doesn't happen. It's just baloney. And I am so proud of my American brothers and sisters for recognizing this giant farce, this unbelievable fraud they tried to perpetuate on you. And in a situation where we didn't have emergency procedures, we didn't have votes showing up from everywhere else 5 days later, this was a slam dunk for Donald Trump. I hope he can step in and do a great job as president. I don't think his motivation and his determination to try and get this country back on track, a lot of people question it. He's going to be a dictator. He's never going to leave. The guy's 78 years old. Look at all that he's endured. He's stuck in there, and because he is there for a purpose. And the final thing I want to talk about, I said last week it was about energy, economy, Elon. I thought Elon Musk was the best addition to this movement. If the smartest, most successful man on earth throws his chips in on the Trump presidency and the course correction. Once again, we're back to that word of getting back to the basics of following the founding fathers' constitutional principles, which was brilliantly laid out. They knew these tests would come, but they designed a form of government and a backbone to that government called the Constitution that has endured once again. But Elon Musk now is being just barbecued by leftist commentators. Well, Musk is already the de facto president. He's in on calls with Zelensky and Trump. He's already got him involved in everything. Well, is that such a horrible thing to have the smartest, most accomplished guy in the world on board in your administration? I love it. Elon Musk is an absolute marvel, and all of a sudden to paint him in this brush of being some right-wing conservative wacko, this is the guy who was developing the electric vehicle situation. This is the guy who privatized space exploration and is building a rocket right now to go get two astronauts off the International Space Station that have been stranded there. This is a guy that is involved in Starlink, which is the most modern communication system that is. That's why he was on the call with Zelensky, because their infrastructure in that country is completely trashed. And Musk has worked to make that whole again, just like he did in Western North Carolina that was completely destroyed by the remnants of Hurricane Helene. Musk has developed things that are amazing. From my standpoint, with bad vision, Musk now has a new product, Neuralink, which is a chip that goes into your brain that can actually assist in creating visuals for people that have never been able to see or have limited vision. I mean, this guy is involved in so many things, is so brilliant. His personal wealth is $290 billion, despite buying Twitter for $45 billion, which is a terrible investment, which he acknowledges, but he said it's worth 100 times that if it creates a platform for free speech and takes away censorship in this country. I applaud Elon Musk. Attack him all you want, leftist idiots, because Elon Musk is a guy that is going to get things done. His track record is amazing, and they're criticizing him on the basis of he's only there to benefit himself. This guy is worth $290 billion. He doesn't need to benefit himself. He benefits himself just by waking up in the morning and coming up with more great ideas and investing his money wisely into the right and correct causes and products and assists for humanity. So attack him all you want. I think the best and the brightest and the most accomplished are the people who need to be involved in this government. And I hope Trump follows through with his promise to put Elon Musk in charge of an independent committee to do a complete audit on this federal government. Look at it, where every dime's being spent. Look where every bit of corruption and fraud is taking place. Look at who is on the gravy train and just sucking at the teat of this government and benefiting themselves tenfold. We've got to clean house. We got to get rid of all these government hangers on, all of this ridiculous excessive spending. And who better to look at that from a technical standpoint and make recommendations to the president than Elon Musk? I say go forth, go hard. Let's get this cleaned up. Let's get back on track, because this is not about Republicans and Democrats. We've lost our way. These parties are supposed to serve the needs of the American people. That's who they work for. Whether you voted for them or not, if you vote Republican, the Democrats in Congress and in the White House in those situations and vice versa, those people are supposed to be working for you regardless. When you've got FEMA this week, they've been exposed of saying in North Carolina and Florida where there's damage, if there's a Trump sign in the yard, skip that house. Don't go offer assistance. That's what government you've been living with right now. That is a complete disservice and a complete departure, dereliction of duty to what this country is all about. And that's serving the needs and the security and the safety and the economic well-being of American citizens. And that's all I've got to say about that. Kip Keefer on Need to Know. We'll be back with you next week.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.